How's it going, nerds? I am here today with Mr. Stevie's Viper Katla. This was sent to me by Kev at Lefty EDC so that I could take a look at the knife and see if I can resolve a issue with the lock bar. So we are getting some lock rock here. So I've got it in the open position, and if you take and move it, there is some lock play there. It's not making noise, so you can't hear it. You'll just have to take my word for it. There is some lock play there. There it goes. So I'm gonna guess that something in the assembly just got shifted a little bit, and that has caused the lock rock. It's unlikely that there is any actual damage. The more likely event is that it's just typical bad Viper tolerances. So, you know, if you've been in the hobby for a while and you're familiar with Italian knife manufacturing, it's very hit or miss. You can get an Italian knife that's done really well. Everything is, you know, greatly fitted together, flawless action, you know, all of that stuff, and everything's good. Or you can get an Italian knife that just develops lock rock out of nowhere for no apparent reason. And, you know, it's just the way it is over there. I don't know, you know, if they just have a lack of good quality control in their manufacturing facilities, or maybe their machines are older and they're, you know, they're not up to speed as far as keeping tight tolerances. I really don't know, you know, why it is. But the Italian makers, like I say, they are very hit or miss. Ooh, this pivot feels pretty tight. I don't know if that's Loctited. It came out. We're good. Okay, that's a good tight pivot. Oh, I see why. We're actually getting the wrong side coming out here. I know Stevie likes to disassemble his knives from the lock side. He has told me that before, so that's why he had it the pivot switch to this side. So for me, I like to disassemble my knives from the show side if possible. So I actually messed up here and took the body screws out of the show side instead of the lock side, because I know I should have known that would be like that since it's Stevie's knife. Anyways, so let me get this apart and see what's up here. The first thing I'll do really is disassemble the knife. Just inspect the parts and see if I can spot any potential problem areas, and then reassemble the knife. And it's as simple as that. I think probably something just shifted a little bit and got out of whack. And, you know, a disassembly, reassembly might just solve the problem. So we're going to try that first, and if all else fails, we'll see where we go from there. So we've got it apart here, and on the lock side, things look pretty tightly fitted. The liners are nested into the micarta really well, and yeah, I see some gaps. I mean, there's a gap, you know, back here. Maybe something could have shifted, and the clip is holding this liner in, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen the clip and see if I can shift the liner forward towards the pivot, and that just might do something. That might tighten that lock back up. So just with the screws loosened right now but not removed on the clip. I want to try and kind of jiggle this liner around. I'm trying not to get off camera here. So yeah, I'm getting movement here. I'm able to move the liner, and so I'm just going to try and shimmy it forward and then retighten the clip. Okay. Now we're just going to do a quick reassembly and see if that made an improvement. And if it did, I'll go ahead and do a full maintenance on the knife, and probably end up doing putting a fresh edge on it for Stevie, because this edge is it feels pretty sharp, but I got to put my touch on it, so I'll probably put a nice wicked edge on there for him and send it back to him a razor blade. And we are T8 on the pivot and T8 on the screw, or T6 on the screws. Okay. I'm guessing there is flow through. I'm guessing the back spacer is flow through with the standoffs in between the brass spacer, because once I get these body screws seated in there, they just keep spinning. So the back spacer has standoffs that are separate from the spacer. So, and we're going to go ahead and redo all the screws, make sure everything is tightened back down where it needs to be, so that we get a good determination if shifting that lock assembly forward has done anything for us. I'm guessing that's what it is. The liner probably just shifted in the freaking scale. It probably just shifted backwards because Lefty EDC sweated on it and rusted it. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It's an inside joke. Let's see here. All right, so we've got those basically snugged up. No play in the pivot. Pivot feels smooth. It's definitely not centered. Nope. Okay, that did nothing. Play is still very much there. Alrighty. Well, so this is going to take significant tinkering, I guess. I'm going to have to probably turn off the camera and tinker with it so that I can get my face right over the knife and see what's going on a little better without the camera in the way. And when I get to a point of, if I find out there is something that I can resolve, I will bring the camera back and finish up the video and go from there. Okay, we are back. It took about 10 minutes of tinkering, but I got it. Okay, so we are 100% solid lockup again. There's no play, and as you can see, the lock is engaging reasonably early for an Italian knife, and action is pretty good. And centering is, we're going to call it 98% good. I'd say maybe just a hair favoring the show side. So I figured out what it was, and it was definitely the fact that Lefty EDC hammered on it with a sledgehammer. No, I'm kidding. It was actually Stevie's fault. So Mr. Stevie, this is twice now with an Italian knife that you have sent me that had an issue that I traced the issue back to flipping the pivot around. So I'm going to go ahead and assume, because I know that you have told me multiple times that you like to disassemble your knife from the lock side. So I'm going to assume that you flipped the pivot over to achieve that. Well, that's what happened, brother. You know, these Italians, their tolerances are, let's just call it inconsistent. And so when you flip the pivot, you know, you're taking a chance of completely changing the way that they have assembled the knife. And so when Lefty actually did the little spine whack and then developed blade play, I believe what actually happened probably was that the liner shifted a little bit, just enough to make the lock play more noticeable. But the real problem is that the pivot was reversed, because I shifted the liner forward with the pivot reversed like you had it, and I still had lock play. But once I flipped the pivot back to the correct side and then made sure that the liner was shifted as far forward as possible and reassembled everything, issue was resolved. So we are good to go. She's tight and solid. Action feels nice. I'd say this is an overly hard detent. I'm going to put this detent in the 8 range. And the reason why, I mean, it works good on the flipper, but because it's got that typical pokey flipper tab that Viper and Voxnays like to do, it's a little bit uncomfortable after flipping it several times. And you can't, I mean, you have to really work to spidey flick this, the thumb studs that are on this. You can spidey flick it, but it's not comfortable. You have to be in an exact position to get that detent to break, and I've slipped off of it just like that several times. Once you know where to put your finger, God, it's, the detent is just, it's too hard. I can get it to spidey flick inconsistently. The thumb flick is okay, but again, detent dialed a little too hard, and I don't think I would attempt to adjust this to make the detent a little softer, because the tolerances are so close and so tight in this knife that it might end up developing lock rock again if you reduce the detent. So it kind of is what it is. The flipper's the best way to deploy this knife so far, in my opinion. It does have a nice snappy action and a good solid thwack on lockup. I like the sound it makes. The action is, I had to put a drop of nano oil on the detent ball because it was scratchy, but as soon as I did that, she's buttery smooth. One shake and she's closed. And yeah, so I don't think you'll have any complaints about the action when you get it back, Mr. Stevie. So what are my opinions of the knife? Well, I don't love it. It's not the worst thing I've ever handled from Viper, but I don't love it. It's too short. The handle is too short, and I don't even have big hands. And where my hands, you know, where the back of my hand lands back here in this whole kind of general vicinity is just super uncomfortable. You've got these squared off pokey corners all around here, and then you feel this whole back side of the clip, and it's just right in, it's a hot spot. It's really ugly. I hate it. I hate the ergos on this knife with a passion. Jimping is good. Jimping is in a good place. My thumb lands on the jimping, so that's all good. I definitely, because, you know, the lines are not rounded around the scales, I feel just biting all up in here in this whole area. And yeah, the ergos are freaking terrible on this knife. I'm sorry, Stevie. I love you, brother, but you know, me and Italian knives, we just don't get along. Yeah, horrible ergos. I like the action. I like the blade shape, but if this knife needed to be bigger, that would have resolved probably 75% of the issues that I have with this knife. If the knife were about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch longer in the handle and in blade length, this would be pretty sweet. It would become comfortable and probably a bit funner to play with as well. Yeah. However, it does have the American Japanese style tanto. Lefty EDC was like, I don't like when it doesn't have the point here. And I was like, well, he was like, that's not a tanto. And I'm like, well, technically this is the original tanto because this is Japanese style tanto. We're used to seeing the American tanto here in America, where you have that point right where the plunge grind goes right there. And so this doesn't have that. It's, it's just a traditional Japanese, tanto. I dig the blade shape here, and it is not slicey. They don't have a super tall flat grind here, so they were not, they didn't knock this down to a thin edge. It's not super slicey. It does have a robust tip. This would be good for piercing, but overall, this knife is not designed as a performer, nor is it designed as an ergonomic, work of art. I don't know what this is trying to do. It's trying to do Vox things. That's what it's trying to do. It does have brass, or maybe it's copper. Yeah, I think it's copper. Either copper or brass pivot collars. Judging by the look of the backspacer, the way that has worn and patinaed, and to me it kind of says brass. So yeah, I think they're brass. And it has this dinky little bent clip here that wants to be deep carry, but it's not deep carry. And so I don't know why this clip exists. They probably should have just put a milled clip on this thing. But I don't know if this knife kind of falls in a weird pricing zone for Viper. It's not super expensive. So they probably kind of janked out on that clip to save on costs, I guess. It does have M390, and I have not sharpened it just yet, so I don't know how that's going to sharpen out, and we shall see. There is a bit of a choil here. I don't consider this a true finger choil. You can choke up on it, but your finger is, in a risky area because there's not really enough wall there to stop your finger from slipping forward onto the edge. If you were to choke up to try and do hard work, it's dangerous. This is not a finger choil. It could be considered a light duty precision work choil. If you choke up here, you could get into some light duty stuff. I don't know, whittling a stick lightly maybe, but otherwise this is not a very good choil. And if it had a true finger choil, if the blade was longer enough to get a true finger choil in there and the handle was a little bit longer, this could have been good ergonomically, but it's just not. And let me get some fingerprints off of here real quick so we can see. It does have this sort of semi-mirrored finish with a stone wash, and this is a common finish that Viper does, and I think it's generally a decent looking working finish. The liner lock disengages easily enough. The jimping is not too aggressive on the liner lock, so it's not painful to disengage the lock at all. It's easy to access. So there are some pros with this knife, but overall I'm gonna give it like a 5 out of 10 for the overall package from me here. It's just not that great. That being said, I'm glad I was able to fix the lockup issue for Mr. Stevie, Brother Stevie, and I will probably get this edge tuned up for him unless he doesn't want it sharpened, and then I will send it back to him. All right, y'all. I've got at least 2 more reviews coming in the next week or so that are going to go live pretty soon. Later.